Good evening. Welcome to all of you. I'm Shani Peer. I'm the director of the Columbia Maison Française. And the Maison Française is delighted to be presenting this event in partnership with the School of the Arts. And we have a special screening of Bertrand Tavernier's 1986 film, Around Midnight, to be followed by a panel discussion. On behalf of my colleagues at the School of the Arts, I'd like to thank Bertrand Tavernier for being here with us this evening, and to thank the cultural services of the French Embassy, and particularly Antonin Baudry, the cultural counselor, and all of his staff, and Unifrance for their support and for helping to organize Mr. Tavernier's visit to New York. Bertrand Tavernier has had a long and prolific career as a director, writer, and producer. He's produced more than 30 films, and he has enjoyed great success in France and internationally. His films have garnered many awards, including the Prix Louis Deluc, the Special Jury Prize Award at the 24th Berlin International Film Festival, the Golden Bear Award at the 45th Berlin International Film Festival, and 4 César Awards. His visit to New York coincides with the U.S. release of his latest film, The French Minister. The original title in French was Quai d'Orsay, which is opening in theaters on March 21st and was selected as the closing night of Rendezvous with French Cinema at the Film Society of Lincoln Center, where it will play on March 16th. And as an aside, I should add that Antonin Baudry, the cultural counselor I thanked earlier, is also the author of the graphic novel Quai d'Orsay, which was the basis for the film, and one of the screenwriters, along with Mr. Tavernier and Christopher Blaine. Tonight's event is the first of several events with Bertrand Tavernier at Columbia, where we've invited him, the Maison Française and School of the Arts have invited him as a visiting French artist. Our next public event will be on March 12th, a screening of another of his films, La vie et rien d'autre, Life and Nothing But. So that's March 12th at 6 o'clock. He'll be joining us for that event, and we'll be doing a Q&A after the screening as well. He's also doing a series of master classes for graduate and undergraduate students at Columbia, and is doing several other public events at other institutions in New York during his stay. So tonight's screening will be followed immediately by a panel discussion in which the director will be joined by Maxine Gordon, the widow of Dexter Gordon, who's currently working on his biography, jazz critic Mark Ruffin, John Szwed, the director of Columbia's Center for Jazz Studies, and Michael Cuscuna, who's a jazz record producer and writer and produced the Round Midnight soundtrack. So Round Midnight was released in 1986 to great critical acclaim and stars legendary saxophonist Dexter Gordon in a fictional story about an expatriate American jazz musician named Dale Turner living in Paris in the late 1950s. Turner's character is reportedly a composite of real-life jazz legends Lester Young and Bud Powell, but maybe we'll hear more about that in the panel discussion afterwards. And not only did Mr. Tavernier make the unusual choice of casting a musician, Dexter Gordon, instead of an actor in the starring role, and featuring several other jazz musicians in the film, including Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, Freddie Hubbard, and Ron Carter. He also recorded the music live. So the music happens as we hear it in a score that earned Herbie Hancock an Academy Award for Best Music Original Score. Dexter Gordon was also nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actor in a Leading Role. So we will now see the film. It's a little bit over 2 hours, and then I hope all of you will be able to stay for the panel discussion. Again, thanks to everyone for coming this evening. Enjoy the film.
Bertrand Tavernier. Want to have a seat? And a good friend of mine and a guy who was on the set, helped produce the soundtracks, and is a good friend of Bertrand, the legendary record producer Michael Cuscuna. Also, all you Columbia University folks will know the next panelist. He's the director of jazz studies here, John Szwed, everyone. And one of the nicest human beings on the planet, the wife of Dexter Gordon, the star, Miss Maxine Gordon.
Because it's not.
You know, we could start with Bertrand, but I would like Maxine. I just gave her a piece of paper. I'm sorry, Maxine.
Okay.
Maxine has the original script from Siskel and Ebert's review Around Midnight.
Remember this,
No.
Bertrand?
So let's have some highlights.
Okay. Well, maybe people are too young to remember Siskel and Ebert. No. Okay, good. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. But they reviewed the film. Can you hear me? No, the mic's not on.
Is mine on? No.
I am talking into it. Okay. I'm loud, though.
Test.
So, okay. Oh, thank you. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, they reviewed the film, and he says, our next movie is named Round Midnight. And this is one of those movies that creeps inside of you and stays there. I don't know when I've seen a movie character that seemed more true to himself than the brilliant, self-destructive saxophone player in this movie, a character played by the great jazz man Dexter Gordon in an amazingly original and convincing performance. It's Academy Award caliber. So when Dexter heard this, he was like, oh, well, Scorsese said to pack your bags, because the backstory on that is on the set, Martin Scorsese, who is a very good friend of Bertrand's and is in the film, was there on the set. So I would stand next to him, and he would do this thing that they do. You know, they go like this. And one day, he turned to me and he said, well, pack your bags. And I was like, what do you mean, pack my bags? He said, oh, you're going to the Oscars. And I was like, they didn't finish the movie yet. And so he said, no, this is like Raging Bull. He said, this performance will take Dexter to the Oscars. I said, well, please don't tell him, because I don't want him to be disappointed. And so, but these guys, they loved the movie. They loved this movie, and you know, that was very helpful.
I think it's a great story. Oh, do I have a mic?
Yeah, you do.
I think it's a great story how this film originally got made. I just heard this story the other day. Bertrand,
Okay, sound.
The film was made, let's say, by chance, by accident, but I do not believe in chance. But everything happened during a lunch between me, Martin Scorsese, and producer Erwin Winkler, who I knew very well. Had been his press, had been PR on some of the film he had done years before, like They Shoot Horses, or Point Blank, or Léo de Las. I work on those films in France. And so I knew Erwin, and we were having lunch, and during the lunch, Erwin said to Marty and myself, if you could choose an idea for a film, if you had a wish to make, the film you want to do, what would you pick up? And Marty said, The Last Temptation of Christ. And I said, I would love to do a film about the jazz musician in Paris. I know a beautiful photograph of Lester Young in the Hotel Louisiana, sitting on a bed and looking. I don't know, I would like to know what was he looking at? And I would love to make a film to discover that. And Erwin called me the next day and said, were you serious when you said that you wanted to do a film about the jazz musician, American jazz musician in Paris? I said, yes. He said, let's try and make it. And I will finance the screenplay. And we started to work on the screenplay with my great, great friend, David Rayfield, who was a man who I loved. I would like to pay a tribute to him because I think he's a very great screenwriter who most of the time was not credited for the film because he worked many times for Sidney Pollack, rescuing films. Mm-hmm. For instance, he practically wrote, let's say, more than 2/3 of Jeremiah Johnson without having his name on, and many other films like that.
3
And
Days of the Condor, too, I think.
he has his name on 3 Days on the Condor, on Castle Keep, but on many other, he has not his name. And I thought he was a marvelous man, and we did the screenplay together. Then the nightmare began. But I knew that later on, because Irwin Winkler was a great producer. He told us only when we were making the film that when we were doing it, he said one day, "Did you know that the film had been rejected by everybody? Every studio, refused the screenplay, refused the film, and in fact, the film was made because during a dinner one night, Clint Eastwood said a few nice things to an executive of Warner. The second scene is I yelled, I really screamed at somebody saying that he did not know his job, and if I was financing the film, I would get more money than him. And the last thing, somebody at the video department of Warner, Warren Lieberfarm, said he would put $2 million on the film. The only guy who believed in the project, and the film was made because of him, because the expectation on domestic in America was zero. Zero, not one single dollar. They were not expecting a single dollar from US distribution.
And your budget? And your budget was $2 million?
My budget was $3 million, and I had to do the film. The condition of Warner was that I would be paid only when they would be sure that the film has been made with the $3 million. Before that, I would not be paid. But Irwin was a wonderful guy, said, "We will fool them." And he paid me under the table. so I could eat, and I could live during 1 year and a half.
Yeah.
But the idea, $3 million to make the film, and we had a tremendous crew. I had one of the best production designers in the world, Alexandre Trauner, who is a legend, who won, I think, 2 Oscars, who did Children of Paradise. And funny story, Herbie came very early at the moment where Trauner was starting to build the Blue Note. And Herbie said to Trauner, he said, "I hope you will work on the sound, because it's very important. I want to hear the bass. I don't want echoes. I don't want that. So I hope you will take the sound in consideration." And Trauner, very small guy, speaking with a strong Hungarian accent, said, "But small voice, I know the problem of sound. I've done the set of the first French talking pictures under the roof of Paris, René Clair." And after that, there was a long silence.
There's so many stories about the film. Like Warner's didn't care so much about the soundtrack. They didn't take the soundtrack, right? They let Columbia Records have the soundtrack to the film.
Herbie was signed to Columbia.
Herbie was signed to Columbia, okay. And also there was a Grammy one for a song called Call Sheet Blues. Mike, you have to tell them the story what that's about.
Herbie got the official soundtrack, and then I got for Blue Note a secondary soundtrack. And so all summer while Bertrand was making the film, I was saying to Herbie, leave that one for me, and we were going back and forth. But we did a scene in Studio Davout, and it was an all-day thing. And it's like the Army making a film. It's you get a call sheet and you get there and it's hurry up and wait, and you wait for hours. And so we were at the Studio Davout, and the cameras were still setting up. So Wayne Shorter started playing this little blues riff, and Billy Higgins and Ron Carter joined in, and then Herbie ran over to the piano and started playing. And to me, it was some of the best music that came out of that whole summer in Paris. And so I put it on the Blue Note album, and I called it Call Sheet Blues, because it was about sitting around waiting. And
you gave everybody credit.
And I gave all four guys credit, because it was just a made-up thing. And so the NARAS, the Grammy Corporation, they called and they said, this doesn't qualify as a soundtrack. Maybe there's some other ways that we can put this in for nomination consideration. And one of them was, they said, this Call Sheet Blues, is that something that's been out before? And I said, no, this is the first time. They said, well, how about we put that under nomination for Best Composition of the Year? And I said, yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, it was totally made up blues. It was not a goddamn thing about it was written. And so it won Best Composition of the Year.
And Mr. Szwed is a historian. You said something interesting in the green room about this was the first film where a black musician, I can't remember the quote, but do you recall what I'm talking about?
Yeah, this is the ultimate backstory, I guess. What you need behind all this is, before there were films, there was a large literature on jazz. It's enormous, actually. There are literally thousands of articles about what jazz was before we even knew it was jazz. And they argued about such things as, was it music? Was it dangerous? And where did it come from? And in some magazines, articles, like The Nation, for example, New Republic. Let's see, New Republic in those days was the really left magazine, and The Nation was not so left. So they had an article on the socioeconomics of jazz, and they discussed how jazz started because the rooms were so small in poor people's houses, they had to learn to dance in cool ways, honest to God. This is in the late 20s. If you read through this literature, which I have, and it's up on our website, Jazz, what's it called? Jazz Studies Online, of these early writings, you'll find, let's see, what would be particularly interesting? Oh, in 1926, over 20 composers issued a statement saying jazz was great music, and Arnold Schoenberg was one of them. I've never understood that, but there you are. So this argument went on, but when it got to the question of where did it come from, nobody mentioned Africa. They mentioned Jews, but only Ashkenazic Jews. And the Sephards come later. They mentioned gypsies, Russians, and all of the place. So the first film is no surprise. We could call it a jazz film. That's the King of Jazz, sound film, 1930, with Paul Whiteman. There's one scene particularly interesting because they have a giant melting pot. It's a Busby Berkeley thing. People are getting in the pot. And all the world's people, Eskimos, I don't know, Southern Italians, Northern Italians, everybody gets into that pot except anyone who's black. There is actually a small, what would they say, was it a colored girl? There's a small colored girl sitting on his knee, the band leader's knee later. I think there's something really interesting going on there, but that's for another day, I guess. Birth of the Blues, shortly afterwards. It's Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby is a kid who's listening to black musicians play on the other side of some bales of cotton, and they hear him playing, and he plays better than they do, so he becomes the leader, and that kind of thing. Carnegie Hall and Night Song, 1947, two films in which a kid who's a great classical player wants to be a jazz player, and classical music triumphs over it, but all white people. But the real killer is New Orleans, the film from 1947. I've seen the shooting scripts from this. I've talked to people. What happened here was they were really going to do the film right. There's some odd things that go on in this film, like they put crystal knock into Storyville at one point, break all the windows. But besides that, it was in the air. This starts talking about black people as invented the music, but by the time it's done, they've all been erased. There's literally no black people left in the film. It starts out heavily black, becomes completely white. And the notes from management said, too many black people in this film. It's as simple as that.
Wow.
And they fired the director, Bieberman, who was already on the Hollywood 10, so he was in trouble anyway.
So what do you think was the significance of the character Dale Turner around midnight, considering Hollywood's history with black jazz musicians.
I just wanted to say one more thing. At some point, the films all came about white people, and nobody seemed to worry about it. Young Man with a Horn. The Subterraneans, no one remembers that film, with Jerry Mulligan as a preacher. Men with the Golden Arms, Sinatra as a junkie drummer. These were sort of cult films about white musicians. And the last film I saw with the jazz musicians in it was Stormy Monday, with Sting as a booker, who has booked the Krakow Free Jazz Sextet to play for American Weekend. So now he's got all whites, but they're Polish, which is even more exotic. Anyway, what occurred to me was, this film is 1986, it's before Bird, 1988, which has another story entirely. This is a film in which we actually see a black musician whose greatness depends on himself and not on somebody who's fronting for him to get an audience in, and who's, because they're a bigger name, like Kirk Douglas in Young Man with a Horn, which, by the way, its original script had him in love with a black woman, only became Doris Day by the time it was done. So he couldn't even get it on, as it were. This is one of the few films where you actually see a great artist at work, and it is a great artist, which is the extra thing. The only other film I can name, and Bird is kind of messy, right? It's not getting into that. The only other film I've ever seen in which this happens, as like the Maestro did it, is the Young Indiana Jones episode, where young Indiana Jones at his prep school sits in with a young Sidney Bechet's group and makes a fool of himself. And Sidney puts an arm around him and says, "You just didn't grow up at the right place with the right people. It's nothing personal." And I thought, here are two films, and I could rattle off hundreds from Corinne Gabbard's book, Jamming in the Margins, which talks about just hundreds, yeah, there were at least 100.
Wow.
Which, only two films which I think were anywhere near honest. Last thing I want to say. There's a short story by Terry Southern, who's involved in films, called, from his book, Red Dirt, Marijuana, and Other Tastes, a story called You're Too Hip, Baby, who I keep telling Maxine, I'm sure it's Dexter. She says it sounds like Dexter. It's a musician in Paris, black musician in Paris, who meets a white guy from the audience in a men's room, and that sort of sets a certain tone to it. And they start to hang together slowly, and at one point near the end of the short story, the Dexter character says to the white guy, I can't figure out what it is you really want. Do you want me to teach you to play saxophone or whatever? And he says, no. He said, is it me you want? Is it my wife? What is it? And the white guy says, it's the sounds, man. I just want to hang and be with the cool people and so forth. And Dexter character says, you're too hip for me, baby. Somehow I thought that worked.
Bertrand, how did Dexter get chosen for the role?
From the beginning, I wanted a musician. I never considered an actor. I wanted, even if I took the idea on the life of Francis Podras and his relationship with Bud Powell, I didn't want to do a film about a pianist. I thought a saxophonist was more interesting to film.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to many concerts. I met many people. Archie Shepp went to see me, said he wanted to do the part. I look at Sonny Rollins. I look at the only person which I would have I completely forgot to try to meet, and I would love, was Illinois Jacket. Mm-hmm. But some I don't think could act. Some Sonny Rollins looked too healthy. I mean, that's for the part. I mean, you could not believe that he needed somebody frail to carry him. I mean, he would have carried everybody.
Yes.
Francis Podras showed me some film of Dexter, which he had, and I thought that he had a presence on the screen, which was incredible. So we went looking for him, and it's my friend Henri Renaud,
yes,
who after a lot of time, called me one day and said, he's in New York, he's in New York. And immediately I took the first plane. And I went with my son, Niels, to the place where Maxime and Dexter were living. By the way, we did a few shots from their windows.
The views completely changed.
So it will be something interesting about New York, about the reality of New York. And I was waiting for Dexter with Niels, my son, and when Dexter arrived with his very special walk, and the way he was, my son turned to me and said, do you think he can live until the shooting? He said, because he looked so, his way of walking looked so strange for him, for a young kid. But it's how we met. We did some tests, and I had one of the strangest reactions from one of the executives at Warner, I will not give his name, saying, it's very strange. Is he homosexual? Because of the way he's moving his hand and the way he calls everybody lady.
Yeah.
And that was a really surprising question.
Dexter had his own way of talking, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So Maxine, you were on the other end of that. How did Dexter, was he surprised that Hollywood, the director would come after him?
No. Is this working now? No? No, not,
Bertrand Tavernier.
there had been I found this letter, I'm doing research on Dexter, it's almost finished, I'm working on the book, but I found a letter from I think it was 62 from Alfred, that Dexter had been approached to
Alfred Lyon, the president of Blue Note.
Blue Note Records, saying Dexter was approached to make a film, a jazz film. And then Alfred writes back and he says, it's not the first time, but when it comes to discussing the money, it probably won't happen. So, Dexter was like, don't get too excited. I'll do the screen test, we'll go to the meeting at the, what was the name of the hotel? The place where Irwin lived?
Oh, the Pierre.
The Pierre Hotel. Oh my God, so fabulous. With green lacquer walls and original painting.
Hollywood.
Yeah, it was. But we went, but in the car on the way back with Bruce Lundvall, he was like, don't get too excited. Don't get too excited. It will be nice. So until it really happened and, signed the papers and we were going to Paris, he kept saying, don't get too excited,
So did he get excited?
He was not surprised.
Did he get excited at the Oscar nomination?
No, actually, because Scorsese told him he would be nominated. I think you had thought he would be nominated also, but I thought he would not be nominated, and so I did not pack clothes when we lived in Mexico in Cuernavaca, and so we went, like we always do, in the winter, and he said, I think we should bring clothes because we would have to go to Hollywood from Mexico. I was like, don't be ridiculous. You're not getting nominated. I'm not buying clothes for something that might not happen. So, of course, I was completely wrong, but he had ordered his clothes from the man who made his clothes, Arthur McGee, had them perfectly fitted, and Arthur worked on something for me without telling me so. But when they had the Oscar nomination, it was Bryant Gumbel on the Today Show.
Wow.
That's how they used to do it. And we had this satellite, and he was saying, you better watch this because they're doing the nominations. I was like, I'm not watching because this is ridiculous. You're a tenor player, you're black, it's your first movie. It's highly unlikely that you're going to be nominated because, I thought, if he believes this and he's not, and then, but anyway, he started laughing and the phone started ringing and he was like, you were wrong. You were so wrong.
He was beat by Paul Newman in The Color of Money.
Yeah.
Michael, what was it like doing some of the music?
Well, there's a lot of stories about this movie. But the one thing I do want to say about the movie is that it's a movie that I don't think an American director could have made, even though it's about something as elemental as an African American art form. And part of it was Bertrand's films. He's a master filmmaker, we all know that, and he makes a wide range of films. I think what distinguished this film was his obsession from the very beginning. What he said to everybody was, I want to make it right, I want to make it real. When something's wrong, when it's not realistic, tell me, please tell me. And it got to the point where I don't know any other director that would really be willing to put up with this. But every morning when we drive in, you get a call sheet and you get the pages that were going to be shot that day. And every morning, a handful of people would make suggestions and change things around drastically. And Bertrand was always interested in authenticity, and that's what drove the film, and that's part beyond his pace, which is another reason I don't think an American director could have done it, because the pace was perfect. It developed perfectly. It wasn't, Cherokee tempo like American films. So, I mean, it was that and his desire to really make it real that I think sets this apart. To this day, I don't think there's anything that ever comes close to that.
And you let him improvise some. You let Dexter improvise some lines, right?
Yes. I'm saying the word improvise. I talked before, the day before. I said, when you will talk to the psychiatrist, to the doctor, I want you to speak about music. And he said more or less what he wanted to say. That was coming from him. It's not an improvisation on the moment, but he knew that he had the space. And he had a few lines. Do you like basketball? It is. This is a line. There was a different line, good, but more arty. And I think he got exactly what the scene was about. That you big guy trying to go to that little girl who is very lonely, and he's trying to say something nice to her, but which happened to be completely not her culture at all. And I think he got something. He understood that. He understood. He had a wonderful knowledge of films. I mean, I remember talking with him about actors, and he liked, for instance, Richard Burton and James Mason and George Sanders. Mm-hmm. And he said, they all sound like tenor saxophone. And that marvelous. That marvelous. Yeah. I mean, James Mason is a tenor saxophone.
Yeah.
You spoke of the rhythm of the film. That was essential for me. There were two things which were essential. First, the music had to be recorded live. I had to put myself, I must say, in the same dangerous situation that the musician would have to play. I mean, it could have been easy. I would have buying the rights of a few Blue Note album and having, but I would never have gotten the shots where he's leaving his instrument, Herbie is looking at him, and I mean those interactions, those smiles between themselves. I mean, but I have to take in consideration that sometimes, because that's part of their lives, they can be not in good shape. They can. I think it's not important in the film. I mean, I really believe that the fact that sometimes they are not playing at the best is not important, because it's part of the story. It's part of the fact of what they have endured, what they have suffered, and for instance, there is a version on soprano saxophone that was a composition of Herbie of something called Straight Time, variation on the Bud Powell composition. And the playing of Dexter is good, but not at his best. I put the music on scenes where people are walking in the street. I have a version of the same number by Wayne Shorter, perfect. But when you put the version of Wayne Shorter, the emotion disappears.
Wow.
I think part of the emotion is the fact that it's a story of somebody who playing is difficult. Playing like the last recording of Lester Young was so moving, even if he's making a mistake. I mean, the emotion of what is compared to some young musicians who are totally perfect, who never make a mistake.
Right.
And sometimes you would wish that they could make mistakes.
That's because they practice in practice rooms instead of nightclubs.
Right.
Maxine, you had something.
I wanted to say to Bertrand, I don't know if you know this, but Michael came to Dexter and he was worried. Yes. He was like, I don't know about this being on a record, the soundtrack. May we have to rethink this because in the beginning, your playing is not, you're sitting down, it's not you at your best. And Michael, of course, hates live recording. It has to be in the studio. It has to be perfect.
Well, that's not true for me.
Oh, excuse me. But remember, you were worried.
Yeah, I was.
He was worried. So Dexter
And
said...
you worried me when you arrived. I was
Dexter
depressed for 2 days.
But I remember this. Dexter said to you, it's a movie. I'm making a movie. The character cannot play the same at the beginning that he plays at the end when he can stand up.
No,
I
knew on the
Berlin.
movie,
He
but
knew.
when it goes to audio, it goes to just
I know,
LP,
but
then-
he said, it's fiction, Michael.
Yeah.
It's fiction, So that's, that was why it wasn't like they're making a movie thinking about the soundtrack, right?
There's so many great stories I heard. I wish we had more time to share them. But one thing I found interesting was that the nightclub was built for the movie, the Blue Note, but the green room was next door, and oftentimes there were jazz musicians being jazz musicians.
Yeah. Yes. We built in the set. We built the Blue Note and the Berlin also, was built by Alexandrone. And we had that green room, and the musician, stayed.
They stayed in the dressing room.
In the dressing room, and were talking all the time and making a lot of noise, even when we were shooting.
They didn't cut when you said.
No. They thought. Herbie said to me that he said the sound of. In the Blue Note, he said, I wish I could have the same kind of quality of sound in all the jazz clubs in the world, because that was perfect.
Did you feel like that, Michael? That the sound was that great?
Very much so. One of my favorite extracurricular activities when we were there was taking musicians into the Birdland set.
Yeah.
Because it was exactly like Birdland.
Freddie thought it was Birdland.
Well, that's another story.
Well, that's the story of Freddie Hubbard in that film it deserved 10 minutes. Okay. Because I don't think he ever realized that he was in a movie.
Right.
From
Freddie?
Yeah, Freddie.
Let's not go there.
No, but I mean, and he's perfect.
Great.
And he's absolutely perfect. But from the moment he woke up to the end, I'm not sure what he remember what he had been doing.
But remember who saved the movie? Really, we give credit to Warren Lieberthal, but I think my child saved the movie, Michael. Remember Woody saved the Freddie?
That's how we got Freddie to the set.
Right.
Yeah.
Boy, how did you get Freddie to the set?
Michael.
Well, all right, I mean, now you're getting into this shit. We're really in dangerous territory, but he flew from LA, so that's a long flight, and they flew business or first class, so booze is free. So Herbie Freddie was a big fan of cognac. So he got to Charles de Gaulle, the worse for wear, and was recuperating in the hotel, and there was a call for him like at 3:00 in the afternoon or something, and he was being uncooperative and wouldn't come out of his room, and we were at the trailer in Epinay in the where all the sets are, and little Woody says, well, why don't you just send a car and have it wait for him, and when he's ready, he'll come. And we did that, and it worked. He came 2 hours later, and he was in great shape and great spirits.
Yeah.
I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't mention that Bertrand has a new movie coming out March 21st in New York and Los Angeles. It's called The French Minister, and there's a special showing at
It's
the
sold
IFC.
out. Forget it.
Oh, the
Sold
showing.
out.
That's how good the movie is, okay? And Maxine this weekend is celebrating Dexter's birthday at Dizzy's Club Coca-Cola Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night with George Cables, who was in Dexter's band for many years. And on the Sunday night, Jimmy Heath will be there, as will Bertrand. So that's our plugs. And I wish we had time for questions, but they're kicking us out in 1 minute.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you.